Welcome to Virginia Time Travel, your portal to Commonwealth's past, present, and future. In the numerous episodes that we have dedicated to the topic of the Civil War, some of the things we've discovered is that there are oftentimes issues that are otherwise not always presented, and if they are presented, it's usually in a certain light that mainstream history is oftentimes acknowledged, accepted, and will continue to go ahead and report upon. But in looking at the different topics of history, sometimes we discover there's more to it than meets the eye. A darker story, which is sometimes found within the shadows. Take, for instance, the subject of women. Most of us are well aware of the fact that the role of women in the Civil War was that being dedicated nurses. We all know the story of Clara Barton going ahead and being an angel on the battlefield. But then, if you go ahead and study the role of women in the Civil War, you discover sometimes there's those occasional stories that you read that say, this seems just a little unbelievable. And so, for this particular episode, we're going to be discussing a little bit the darker side of the women's history of the Civil War, a topic which not everyone likes to go ahead and discuss, but is certainly part of the fabric of our nation. And so, sometimes we have to shed light on the darker side of ourselves in order to learn more. Joining us is author Kim Murphy, who has gone ahead and taken on a topic that is certainly very much a unique one, to say the least. And so today we're discussing the book If I Had a Choice, namely rape within the Civil War itself. And I suppose the best way to start off is by asking what got you interested or what piqued your curiosity on this topic?
Well, I was writing fiction, Civil War fiction, and I kept coming across the historians saying that rape was rare during the war. And when I first started researching it, I didn't question it. But then the more I researched, the more I realized something wasn't quite right. So I started researching that topic in itself. And that's actually how I got my interest in it.
Now, in researching something like this, I mean, even in modern society, we know women do not like discussing the issue of rape when it happens to them. And so, the historians are saying that this is, few and far between. And so, could you say that the mentality of today is still ever present in the past? It's a topic you don't want to discuss.
Definitely. In fact, that's where the historians really were saying they looked upon it as a gentlemanly war. And anybody knows war is war. And true, women did not talk about it. In fact, it was less talked about then than it is now.
And so, since this is a subject which is so rarely talked about, how were you able to successfully find sources or even documentation in relation to this, since it's seeming as a taboo topic?
I first started out with the intention of writing an article. So I went to the online sources because a lot of the Civil War newspapers are online, diaries, letters, many of those are online, and the official records of the war, which is 128 volumes of correspondence between the two armies. So that's where I started, and I started building a database. And after that, then I realized my database kept growing, because then I started adding the court-martial records that I could find as well. And so my database grew beyond what was possible for an article. It was just too much, so I started writing a book then.
Now, when it came to the subject, these assaults on women, now was this specifically on just one side, like Northern versus Southern, or was this rampant in both armies that this would occur?
It's really difficult to tell because we've lost so many of the Confederate records between the plundering of the South and then the burning of Richmond during the retreat. There's really no way to know for sure that it was rampant on both sides. Now, of the Confederate records that I found, it was most common, it seemed like, in the guerrilla areas and the times they went north, which is typical of warfare. But the thing you have to remember is the attitudes were pretty much the same on both sides of the armies. So if the records were intact, I'm sure you'd find pretty much the exact same thing.
Okay, so this is clearly a problem both sides have in this particular issue. Now, something that I'm sure a lot of people want to know for certain is, you know, were these men disciplined, or was this just something that the armies just kind of turned a blind side to, or said boys will be boys mentality?
There was the attitude that rape was harshly dealt with, but the reality was totally different. And yes, it came out to be more like boys will be boys, because even the records where they actually went to court-martial and the like, rarely were they disciplined harshly. And even so, if they were given a severe sentence, the regiment would often do a letter-writing campaign to the president, and usually he would pardon them.
It seems rather strange that, you know, you have honest Abe Lincoln who is pardoning these kinds of crimes. I mean, it wasn't really that successful that this happened more often than not. I mean, it seems it's so counter everything that you would think of for this president.
He did pardon quite a few rapists.
Wow.
And it wasn't just him, though, because after his death, Johnson did as well. So it was just the common attitude that it was more important that to be a good soldier than whether he had committed a rape.
It's amazing just to think, you know, something like this would happen in today's society. You know, it's so greatly looked down upon, but back then it was completely different. Now, for women as a whole, you know, if you're a woman, you wake up one day and here comes the enemy army, depending on which side of the border you're on. I mean, you know, was there a different type of treatment when it came down to race, when it came down to women, or was the whole gender fair game then in this case?
It was a little bit of both. With the black women, they really had no say, and that was true with both sides of the army, because Union didn't actually consider rape. It was the society as a whole that, generally speaking, they felt a black woman was unrapeable. They figured they were promiscuous. There were a few court records before the war that took place in the North, but it was mostly during the Civil War where black women actually began to have a voice, where they actually got convictions of white men who had raped them. Now, poor white women were almost equally bad off because, again, they were considered promiscuous. So even though she was white, she still did not have much say. She had to prove she had been raped, and the largest voice was those of the rich white women. But even so, the jurisdictions were against them as well, because of the fact that they often felt a woman would be too ashamed to make such an admission in public.
Now, you did say that some women would go ahead and fight back and you know, make a vocal claim against this. Who were some of these women that decided to stand up against the norm and say, I'm not going to tolerate this, and neither should anybody else?
Just the brave women, pretty much like today. I mean, just the brave women who came forward, because so many of them did not. And so we had the brave women who came forward and made a voice, and they helped the others pave a way for the others.
Now, in doing all of this research, what is it that you think what's the most astounding thing that you discovered in all of this? Because, I mean, obviously, you know, the fact that the historians were kind of just, you know, turning a bit of a blind eye to the topic, obviously, there must be more to this than meets the eye. But, you know, after doing all this research and being able to write an entire book about this, what do you feel is, you know, the one thing that you can take away from it that, you know, future generations should hopefully be able to learn as well?
Well, basically what I really wanted to do more than anything was give the women a voice, because they had been silenced too long. The historians ignored their voices, and I just wanted to give them the voice. They tried to make the voice for themselves during the era, and people were ignoring it, and so I just wanted to do that for them.
Well, it's definitely, you know, by producing an entire text on this topic, you have gone ahead and done so. But in giving a voice to the voiceless, it's always a difficult task, and so, but certainly all the hard work in finding all this is certainly admirable. But this is not your only book that you have written. You brought a couple other books with you today. Promise and Honor was your first book, as you were telling me before. And if you could, what is this one about?
Well, that's the one that started my writing of books in general. I had always loved history, and it wasn't until I actually moved to Virginia, though, that I got into the Civil War. And I was just passing the Chancellorsville battlefield, and I was thinking, it happened here. And then, but I saw the foundation of the inn, and I thought of the individuals in the inn and wondered what happened to them when this battle was going on. And it wasn't until actually several years later that I found out what had happened to them. But I wanted to write something to show, again, basically how the women dealt with having armies on their land and the like, and that's how I started Promise and Honor, and it deals with a woman who smuggles supplies for the Confederacy. And it wasn't out of loyalty to the Confederacy, though, either. She just wanted to help those who were wounded and in need.
Now, for women who were doing things like this, like smuggling items into the Confederacy, what kind of dangers were they looking at in this case? I mean, obviously capture's the big one.
Right.
But what other kind of dangers were they looking at in general? I mean, because you always kind of hear the occasional stories of the smugglers who come in, and the ones who succeed are always the ones that are famous, and it's like, oh yeah, it's easy, we don't have nothing to worry about. But there's always that added sense of danger to it, and like what kind of life could you expect doing this? I mean, was it cloak and dagger, or?
Well, she didn't do it all the time. I mean, because she lived on a farm, so she had to take care of her farm, and again, because she lived in the South, most of the slaves had left, and so she was dealing with that, and then doing the smuggling, and she was doing some nursing, so she was doing a little bit of everything. But smuggling is very dangerous, obviously, and the worst would be the capture, and of course then, being a woman, she also would have to worry about whether she was going to be raped. And that was still at the point, though, that I was believing what the historian said, that it was actually rare, but that's when I was actually beginning to think, maybe not so much.
So, just working on one book, you start thinking about another, and the next thing you know, you have another, and another, and another. It's just a domino effect which occurs from there. Now, another text that you brought with you is Whispers from the Grave. Now, I enjoy a good ghost story myself, or a jaunt in the cemeteries, just to see who you can find. And now, is this going to be a book that you just sit next to a gravestone and maybe it'll start telling you something, or is there a little bit more to it than meets the eye?
A little more to it than that. It's my Civil War ghost story, as you said, and actually I didn't have to do near as much research for that one because I knew quite a bit about the Civil War then. I just needed to research what actually happened during at the area where it was, and it takes place in the James River Plantation area. So essentially what I did was create my own legend around the history, and the main ghost is a Union scout, and that's how you have it, that the scouts go through the areas before the armies do and the like, and so he obviously had difficulties.
Well, if he found himself killed. Now, you said you would go ahead and create the legend around it. And what inspired you to create a legend around the history? Was it just because this would give you a little bit more license to examine things, or like myself, I just find it a little bit more fun when you can not have to worry about somebody giving you that aha moment, you got your information wrong. Exactly.
It's just that I didn't want to go with a legend that was already there and make my story around it. Again, I wanted the fun of just creating my own, and it's just much more fun doing it that way.
And now, what kind of adventures, or, well, I'm not sure I'd call it adventures, but exactly like, how does a Union Scout spy ghost, go through the areas? Is it like just their observations of watching the landscape change, or how does it work exactly?
Well, he's not a very nice ghost, but he's not the only ghost there, you know, so this plantation has several ghosts wandering the plantation, and the modern people have to figure out what happened in the past so they can heal the present.
Now, since you're doing a ghost story, did you pull any actual ghost tales from the Civil War as an inspiration for this book, or was this just a, let's just go off of everything we know and just build from there?
No, I didn't use any legends. That's why I said I created my own, and it was just totally around the history, and so I checked out exactly what happened during the war in this area, and then that's how I created my own legend.
Now, the final book you brought is called The Dreamers, and that's dealing with a witch trial, from what I can tell. And so, did Virginia have any witch trials going on?
Virginia had witch trials, and that's why, again, I just love playing with history. I like bringing out these little known facts in history and play with them, and that's what that's about. It's not really just about a witch trial, though, because again, a lot of people don't realize that Virginia had witch trials, and in fact, Virginia has the dubious honor of having had the first one on the North American continent in 1626.
Oh, really?
Salem gets all the credit because of the fact that all of their records are intact, but we've lost so many of our 17th century records, again, because of the Civil War. But I also played with the fact of course, we have the Native Americans in the 17th century quite prominently, so I had that in there. And then I had what's called the cunning folk, and most people have not heard of the cunning folk. They were the healers of the 17th century. They were much more common than doctors.
Now, what exactly is a, you said they were a healer. Now, is this like Indians, whites, a little of both?
That's the English. It's the English healers.
Interesting.
All the countries in Europe had their equivalent, but in the English colonists, it was the cunning folk.
Now, how did you come up with a name like for cunning? Is it because it was just they were able to come up with the most unique methods of curing, or was this just an agreed upon name, or did somebody just come up with it and it stuck?
That's the name that they used in the 17th century. And now I had not actually found records that they came to Virginia shores, but they were so common during the time period that I have difficulty believing they weren't here. In fact, the first witch trial that I was telling you about, she sounded like she was a cunning woman.
Well, since we have this first witch trial, and I'll be perfectly frank with you, I've never heard of this one myself, so I am curious to know. So in 1626, there was a witch trial. What are some of the particulars about this trial? I mean, who was she? What happened? Did she kind of, was it kind of like in Salem? Well, her terms are bigger than my terms. She must be a witch. I mean, what were the circumstances behind this?
Her name was Joan Wright, and she's not even the most famous Virginia witch, but she was the first that we know of, at least. And she was a midwife. Now, that alone probably would not necessarily mean that she was a cunning woman, but she did predict the future, and including in that, she predicted several people's deaths. Now, the thing is, what people don't realize, if they were a healer, they knew about diseases and the like, so she could have easily predicted just like any doctor. And she was not executed. There was only one known witch in Virginia who was executed, and she actually did not arrive in Virginia shores, but she was fined 100 pounds of tobacco.
So, let me get this straight. So Virginia decides we're going to fine you with tobacco because you're a witch. Salem is ready to go ahead and dismantle you, hang you, crush you, drown you, or do anything else that they can come up with. You see, folks, this is why I keep saying Virginia's a more civilized society and Massachusetts does not. See, now we have another historical proof to prove this. Now, what got you interested? Now, you said, pretty much the big theme is that all your books is always the little events in history which has gotten you interested in it. And so, in looking at all these little events, you know, why do you think why do you think other people should go ahead and follow your lead and delve into these smaller topics? Is it because we all need a niche that we would like to grab onto, or, you know, should we educate ourselves more on these smaller issues to become better people?
I think we need to educate ourselves on the smaller issues. Too many times we focus on the big issues and lose track of the small ones. And the thing is, we can just learn so much from history if we just take the time.
It's true. And you know, they always say, you know, those who don't know it are doomed to repeat it as a result. Now, what other topics are currently on the back burner? Because I'm always curious to know, when we have our authors, what's in the works in the future? Have you stumbled on any other little topics while researching out these other books that you're kind of saying to yourself, you know what, this sounds kind of interesting, as a sneak peek of what's to come from Kim Murphy?
Well, currently I'm working on the third book in the Dreaming series, but I've been thinking about possibly actually writing about the witch trials, the non-Salem witch trials, which would include not just Virginia, but the other colonial states as well, because I think it's time that we bring that out in the open.
And how many of those have you stumbled on, if you don't mind my asking?
Again, I have a bit of a database, but I don't remember offhand. There's quite a few, I mean, and especially once you get more into the New England area as well, but, and I'm not talking about Salem, but there were quite a few, and you were talking about Virginia. I think one of the reasons, too, why there weren't as many witch trials, at least that we know of, is because Virginia was a little more spread out.
Well, that's true. We do like our space. That is one advantage we have over them. And I always find it's fascinating when we look at these little events in history and topics like that, because you never know what you're going to find and discover. And so, you know, if you had one message that you would want to go ahead and take advantage of saying to people when it comes to studying history, what would you want them to know the most when it comes to studying history?
That would be a hard thing to decide on. I just wish they would keep teaching cursive writing so that more people could read history.
Oh, that's true too. Who knows? Maybe that would be your next topic, the history behind cursive, since it's becoming a lost art in and of itself. Now, if anyone would like to go ahead and find out any more information, is there a website that they can go to peruse over your writings?
Oh, sure, kimmurphy.net.
Kimmurphy.net. Oh, very simple, very straight to the point, very easy to work with. Can't always go wrong. And so, you know, Kim, you know, I noticed that with the Dreamer series, you do have the Gold Award symbol on that, and so I just wanted to ask real quick: has that is an award? Is that?
Yeah, many of my books have actually won awards. That one was an indie publisher or book award, and in fact, Whispers from the Grave has won an award, and Promise and Honor was a finalist, and actually I'd rather die as a current finalist, and I don't find out next month whether it's won anything or not.
Oh, well, if ever there's a reason to go ahead and pick up some of these books now, it's because they, you know, award-winning. Can't go wrong with that one. You know, Father's Day coming up pretty soon. A lot of folks wouldn't mind that, and makes a great gift otherwise. But, you know, for ourselves, we do have one little thing for you here, and that is a little book of our own that we went ahead, and that is The Hidden History of Northern Virginia.
Oh, why, thank you.
And since you are a big fan on topics dealing with hidden history, this might certainly be
for sure.
right up your alley. Who knows, maybe you'll find something in there that we ourselves could have missed. You never know. Stranger things have been known to happen as a result. When it comes to women in the Civil War, it is definitely something that there's a lot to look at. I mean, we know all the famous stories, but in today's episode we've learned there are not so famous stories. And when we think about these not so famous stories, you know, sometimes we are inspired to go ahead and look at them. There are the unsung heroes, the people who actually went ahead and decided to go against the grain. But as said before, in looking at the stories that we have early on, sometimes there are the darker ones, the ones that we try ever so hard to try to ignore, to forget, to do everything we can to let it remain buried. Mainstream history itself has spent a great deal of time saying rape rarely ever occurred and that it was just few and far between. But as we've learned today, it definitely happened a lot more, and we know more about what the North at least had done than the South. But if we had to guess, proportionally, it may have been equal. To learn more about this particular topic, you can go ahead and visit our website at www.timetravel21.com, or you can email us at timetravel21@yahoo.com. Also, please keep in mind that if you would like to have a historical individual come to an event of your own to discuss any topics that we've had here on the show, or a topic you find of interest, you can go ahead and get in touch with us through our website or through our email in order to make arrangements by that method.